The stagecoach rattled into Bannack, Montana on a dusty September afternoon in 1875, carrying a woman whose hands wouldn't stop shaking no matter how tightly she pressed them together in her lap. Penelope Barrett watched through the grimy window as weathered buildings came into view, their wooden facades bleached by sun and wind. She had been traveling for 3 weeks, each mile taking her farther from St. Louis and the warrant that had been issued for her arrest. The letter in her reticule, creased and reread 100 times, promised a new beginning with a rancher named Preston Fletcher, who needed a wife. He had placed an advertisement seeking a respectable woman willing to brave the frontier, someone who could keep house and didn't mind the isolation of ranch life. Penelope had responded with a carefully worded letter that omitted the most important details of her recent past. The stagecoach lurched to a stop outside the freight office, and the driver called down that they had reached their destination. Penelope gathered her small carpetbag and stepped down onto the main street, her legs unsteady after days of travel. The town was smaller than she had imagined, a collection of rough buildings arranged along a single dirt road with mountains rising in the distance. Miners and ranchers moved along the wooden sidewalks, their boots creating a constant rhythm against the planks. She had barely caught her breath when a man approached, removing his hat to reveal sandy brown hair and eyes the color of creek water. He was tall and lean, his face weathered by outdoor work, and he carried himself with an easy confidence that made her pulse quicken despite her nervousness. "Miss Barrett," his voice was deep and surprisingly gentle. "I'm Preston Fletcher." Penelope felt her throat tighten. This was the moment she had been dreading, when the reality of what she had done would catch up with her deception. But Preston was looking at her with something like hope in his eyes, and she found herself nodding. "Yes, I'm Penelope Barrett. It's good to finally meet you, Mr. Fletcher," he smiled, and the expression transformed his serious face. "Please call me Preston. I hope the journey wasn't too difficult. It's a long way from St. Louis. I've made it safely, and that's what matters." She tried to keep her voice steady, to sound like the respectable woman he believed her to be. Preston took her bag and gestured toward a wagon waiting nearby. "I thought we might get you settled at the hotel for tonight. The Reverend can marry us tomorrow if that suits you, or we can wait a few days if you need time to get your bearings." The directness of the statement made her breath catch. Tomorrow. She would become Mrs. Preston Fletcher tomorrow, and he would never know that back in St. Louis. The authorities were looking for a bank clerk named Penelope Barrett, who had helped her brother steal nearly $2,000 from the Continental Bank. She had been desperate, believing her brother's promises that he would use the money to pay off gambling debts that threatened both their lives. Instead, he had disappeared with every cent, leaving her to face the consequences alone. "Tomorrow would be fine," she heard herself say. "I understand you've been waiting for a wife, and I don't want to delay your plans any longer than necessary." They rode through town in the wagon, and Preston pointed out the various establishments. The general store owned by a widow named Mrs. Chen, who had come from San Francisco. The saloon that stayed rowdy on Saturday nights, but was mostly quiet otherwise. The small schoolhouse where 3 dozen children learned their letters from a young teacher who had come from Boston 2 years ago. "My ranch is about 5 miles outside town," Preston explained as they pulled up in front of a modest hotel. "It's not fancy, but it's a good piece of land with water and grazing. I run about 200 head of cattle, and I've got 3 men who help with the work. Cookie does the cooking and manages the bunkhouse. Jake and Samuel handle the daily operations with me." Penelope nodded, trying to imagine herself in this new life. "It sounds like you've built something solid here. I've worked hard for it." There was pride in his voice, but not arrogance. I came out here in '68 with nothing but a horse and a bedroll. Took every job I could find until I had enough to buy my first piece of land. Been building ever since." He helped her down from the wagon, his hands strong and steady on her waist. For a moment they stood close together, and Penelope felt the warmth radiating from his body. She had expected a rough frontier man, someone hardened by the difficult life out here. But Preston's touch was careful, almost tender, and when he looked at her, she saw kindness in his expression. "I'll let you rest," he said, stepping back. "I've paid for your room and you can take your meals downstairs. I'll come by tomorrow morning around 9 if that gives you enough time to prepare." "Thank you, Preston. That's very generous." He settled his hat back on his head and gave her another of those transforming smiles. "I'm just glad you're here, Penelope. I've been looking forward to this day for a long time." She watched him climb back onto the wagon and drive away, dust rising behind the wheels. The guilt twisted in her stomach like a knife. Preston Fletcher was a good man who deserved an honest wife, and instead he was getting a fugitive who had lied from the very first letter. The hotel room was small but clean, with a narrow bed and a washstand in the corner. Penelope sat on the edge of the mattress and pulled out the letter she had written but never sent, the one that told Preston the truth about her situation. She had composed it a dozen times during the journey, each version trying to explain without making excuses. But every time she considered actually mailing it, fear stopped her. What if he rejected her? What if he reported her to the authorities? She would end up in prison, and her life would be over before it had truly begun. She tore the letter into small pieces and dropped them into the wash basin, watching as the ink began to blur. Tomorrow she would marry Preston Fletcher, and she would work every day to be the wife he deserved, even if she could never tell him the whole truth about who she really was. The next morning dawned clear and cool, with autumn beginning to paint the higher elevations in shades of gold and red. Penelope dressed in her best traveling suit, a deep blue wool that brought out the color in her eyes. Her reflection in the small mirror showed a pale face framed by dark hair she had pinned up carefully. She looked respectable, she thought. She looked like someone who belonged here. Preston arrived exactly at 9, dressed in clean clothes and carrying a small bouquet of wildflowers he must have picked that morning. The gesture touched her more than she wanted to admit. "You look beautiful," he said, and the sincerity in his voice made her cheeks warm. "Thank you. The flowers are lovely." They walked together to the small church at the edge of town, a simple wooden building with a cross mounted above the door. The reverend was a middle-aged man with kind eyes who asked them to stand before him while he opened his Bible. There were no other witnesses except the reverend's wife, who played a slightly out-of-tune piano during the brief ceremony. Penelope repeated the vows in a voice that trembled slightly, promising to love and honor Preston Fletcher until death parted them. When Preston slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, she felt the weight of it like a chain. This was real now. She was married to this man, bound to him by law and by the promises she had just made. "You may kiss your bride," the reverend said with a smile. Preston's kiss was gentle and brief, his lips warm against hers. When he pulled back, he was smiling in a way that lit up his entire face. "Hello, Mrs. Fletcher." "Hello, Mr. Fletcher." She managed to return the smile despite the anxiety churning in her stomach. They signed the marriage certificate, and the reverend's wife produced a small cake she had baked for the occasion. Penelope ate a slice while making polite conversation, her mind racing with thoughts of what came next. She would go to Preston's ranch now, to the home they would share. She would sleep in his bed, bear his children if God willed it, and live out her days as his wife. And all of it would be built on a foundation of lies. The ride to the ranch took over an hour, the wagon following a rutted track that wound through grassland and across shallow creeks. Preston pointed out landmarks along the way, talking about the land with the affection of someone who had fought for every acre. Penelope listened and tried to imagine herself belonging here, tried to see this vast open country as home. The ranch house came into view as they crested a low rise. It was larger than she had expected, a solid log structure with a covered porch and glass windows that must have cost a fortune to transport. Nearby stood a barn, a bunkhouse, and various outbuildings arranged in a practical layout. Cattle dotted the hillsides in the distance, dark shapes against the golden grass. "It's wonderful," Penelope said, and meant it. "Preston had built something real here, something lasting. I'm glad you think so." He pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house. "I know it's not like what you're used to in St. Louis, but I hope you'll be comfortable here." She thought of her cramped room in the boarding house where she had lived after her parents died, the thin walls that let in every sound from the street. "I think it's going to be more comfortable than what I left behind." Preston helped her down and carried her bag inside. The interior of the house was simple but well built, with a main room that served as kitchen and living area, 2 bedrooms, and a small room he used as an office. The furniture was handmade but sturdy, and everything was surprisingly clean for a bachelor household. "Cookie usually does a bit of tidying when he's not busy with the men," Preston explained, noticing her surprise. "He's a good man, even if his biscuits could break teeth." A knock at the door interrupted them, and 3 men entered when Preston called for them to come in. They removed their hats respectfully, and Preston made introductions. Cookie was an older man with a grizzled beard and sharp eyes that seemed to take Penelope's measure in an instant. Jake was younger, probably no more than 25, with an easy smile and sun-bleached hair. Samuel was quiet and serious, a man of perhaps 40 with calloused hands and a reserved manner. "Welcome to the ranch, Mrs. Fletcher," Cookie said. "The boss has been talking about you for weeks." "It's good to finally meet you." "Thank you. I'm pleased to meet all of you." Penelope felt their curiosity as they studied her, wondering about the woman their boss had married sight unseen. The men made polite conversation for a few minutes before excusing themselves to get back to work. When they were gone, Preston showed Penelope around the house properly, explaining where everything was kept and assuring her that she could arrange things however she liked. "This will be our room," he said, opening the door to the larger bedroom. A big bed dominated the space, covered with a quilt that looked like someone's careful handiwork. "I know this is all happening fast. We barely know each other, and now we're married. I want you to know that I don't expect anything you're not ready to give. We can take our time getting to know each other." The kindness of the offer made Penelope's eyes sting with unexpected tears. "You're a good man, Preston Fletcher. I'm just trying to do right by you." He touched her cheek gently. "I meant what I said in my letters. I'm looking for a partner, someone to build a life with, not just someone to cook and clean, but a real companion. I hope that's what you're looking for too." "It is." The words came out more fervently than she intended because it was true. She wanted this fresh start, this chance to be someone different than the frightened woman who had helped her brother commit a crime. "I want to make a good life here with you." Preston's smile was warm with relief. "Then we're going to be just fine." The first weeks of marriage passed in a blur of new routines and careful discoveries. Penelope learned the rhythm of ranch life, rising before dawn to prepare breakfast while Preston and his men headed out to work the cattle. She learned to manage the heavy cast iron stove, to bake bread that didn't turn out like bricks, to prepare meals that would satisfy men who worked hard physical labor all day. Cookie offered advice when she asked for it, and she slowly began to find her confidence in the kitchen. Preston was patient with her inexperience, never complaining when dinner was late or the coffee too weak. He would come in each evening covered in dust and sweat, and his face would light up when he saw her. They would eat together at the small table, talking about their days. He told her about the cattle and the land, about his plans to expand the herd next spring. She talked about the garden she wanted to plant, the curtains she hoped to sew for the windows. At night, they lay together in the big bed, and Preston kept his promise to take things slowly. He held her gently, his kisses tender and unhurried. When they finally came together as husband and wife, it was with a tenderness that surprised her. She had expected something rougher, more demanding. Instead, Preston treated her like something precious, his touch reverent as he learned the map of her body. "Are you happy?" he asked her one night as they lay tangled together in the darkness, her head resting on his chest. Penelope felt the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek. "Yes," she said, and realized with a shock that it was true. Despite the guilt that still gnawed at her, despite the fear that her past would catch up with her, she was happy here with this man who had offered her a second chance without even knowing it. "I'm glad." His hand stroked through her hair. "You've made this house feel like a home, Penelope. I didn't realize how lonely I was until you got here." The words made her throat tighten with emotion. She wanted to tell him the truth, to confess everything and trust that his kindness would extend to forgiveness. But fear kept the words locked inside her chest. What they had was too new, too fragile. She couldn't risk shattering it with the truth. As autumn deepened into early winter, Penelope began to feel like she truly belonged at the ranch. She learned the names of all the horses in the barn, could identify each of Preston's cattle dogs by their distinctive barks. She made friends with Mrs. Chen at the general store, who taught her how to stretch their supplies during the winter months. The town began to feel less foreign, the vast Montana landscape less intimidating. She and Preston grew closer with each passing day, their initial awkwardness giving way to genuine affection. She loved the way he would seek her out during the day for a quick kiss, the way he always had a hand on the small of her back when they walked together. She loved his laugh, rare but genuine when something truly amused him. She loved the way he looked at her like she was the best thing that had ever happened to him. But the past has a way of catching up, no matter how fast or far you run. It was a cold December morning when the stranger rode into Bannack. Penelope was at the general store selecting fabric for new shirts for Preston when Mrs. Chen's expression changed, her welcoming smile fading to something more cautious. "Can I help you?" Mrs. Chen asked the man who had just entered. He was tall and thin, dressed in a dusty suit with a badge pinned to his vest. A U.S. Marshal, Penelope realized with a sickening drop in her stomach. She turned away quickly, pretending to examine a bolt of calico while her heart hammered against her ribs. "I'm looking for a woman named Penelope Barrett," the marshal said. "She's wanted in connection with a bank robbery in St. Louis. She's about 5'5", dark hair, blue eyes. Would have arrived here sometime in the late summer or early fall. We get a lot of people passing through, Mrs. Chen said carefully. Most don't stay long. What makes you think she came to Bannack? We've been tracking her movements. She took the stage this direction, and this is the logical stop between Virginia City and Helena." The marshal pulled out a folded paper. "I've got a sketch here if you want to take a look." Penelope felt like she might faint. She had to get out of the store, had to warn Preston, had to do something. But moving would draw attention to herself, so she stayed frozen in place, praying that Mrs. Chen wouldn't recognize her from the description. "I'll keep an eye out," Mrs. Chen said neutrally. "If I see anyone matching that description, I'll let you know." The marshal thanked her and left, the door closing behind him with a soft jingle of bells. Penelope waited until she heard his boots on the wooden sidewalk outside before turning around. Mrs. Chen was looking at her with an expression that was hard to read. "That fabric you're holding would make a nice shirt," Mrs. Chen said quietly. "Will you be taking it?" "Yes," Penelope managed to say. "And I should get back to the ranch. Preston will be expecting me." Mrs. Chen wrapped the fabric in brown paper without saying anything more, but her eyes were knowing. Penelope paid quickly and hurried out to the wagon, her hands shaking so badly she could barely manage the reins. The ride back to the ranch felt endless. What was she going to do? The marshal was here, actively looking for her. It was only a matter of time before someone made the connection. She thought about running, but where would she go? And how could she leave Preston without any explanation? By the time she reached the ranch, she had made her decision. She had to tell Preston the truth. She had to trust that the man who had shown her such kindness would understand, would help her figure out what to do. The thought of seeing disappointment in his eyes made her feel sick, but she couldn't keep lying to him. He deserved better than that. Preston was in the barn checking on a mare that was due to foal soon. He looked up when Penelope entered, his face breaking into a smile that faded when he saw her expression. "What's wrong?" He was at her side immediately, his hands on her shoulders. "Penelope, what happened?" "I need to talk to you." Her voice came out thin and strained. "There's something I should have told you before we got married, but I was afraid. I was a coward and I lied to you, and now it's all falling apart." Preston guided her to a hay bale and sat down beside her, keeping one arm around her shoulders. "Whatever it is, we'll handle it together. Just tell me what's going on." So she did. The words tumbled out in a rush, the whole sordid story. Her brother's gambling debts and the threats from the men he owed money to. How he had begged her to help him, promising he would pay everything back if she could just get him access to enough cash. How she had used her position as a bank clerk to falsify a withdrawal, believing she was saving her brother's life. How he had disappeared with the money, leaving her to face the consequences alone. "There's a U.S. Marshal in town looking for me," she finished, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry, Preston. I should have told you the truth from the beginning, but I was desperate. I thought if I could just start over somewhere new, I could leave it all behind. But I can't. It's caught up with me, and now I've dragged you into my mess." Preston was quiet for a long moment, and Penelope braced herself for his anger. Instead, when he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "Did you spend any of the money yourself?" She shook her head vehemently. "No. I didn't even want to take it in the first place, but my brother said they were going to kill him. He's the only family I have left since our parents died. I thought I was saving his life. And now he's gone, and you're left holding the consequences." Preston's jaw tightened. "That's a coward's way, leaving his sister to face the law alone." "I made the choice to help him," Penelope said miserably. "I'm responsible for what I did, even if my reasons seemed good at the time. The bank lost $2,000 because of me. People's money that they trusted the bank to keep safe." Preston stood up and paced the length of the barn, his expression troubled. Penelope watched him, waiting for him to tell her to pack her things and leave. She wouldn't blame him if he did. She had lied to him, had married him under false pretenses. He had every right to be furious with her. Finally, Preston stopped pacing and looked at her. "Do you love me, Penelope?" The question caught her off guard. "What? It's a simple question. Do you love me?" "Yes." The answer came without hesitation, from somewhere deep in her chest. "I do love you, Preston. I didn't mean to, I didn't expect to, but I do. You're the best man I've ever known." He nodded slowly. "I love you too. I think I started falling for you the moment you stepped off that stagecoach, looking scared and brave all at once. These last few months with you have been the happiest of my life. So here's what we're going to do." We're going to go talk to that marshal, and we're going to tell him the truth." "Preston, no. If we do that, they'll arrest me. I'll go to prison. Or maybe we can work something out." He sat back down beside her and took her hands. "I've got some money saved up. Not $2,000, but enough to make a start on paying the bank back. And I know people, Penelope. I've been ranching in this territory for 7 years, and I've made friends. The territorial judge is a fair man. If we can show that you're willing to make restitution, that you were coerced into helping, that you've built a good life here, maybe he'll show mercy. You would spend your savings on me. Even after I lied to you, you made a mistake trying to protect your family. That doesn't make you a bad person, it makes you human." His thumb rubbed across the back of her hand. "I meant what I said in my vows, Penelope, for better or worse. This is worse, and I'm not walking away from you." She threw her arms around him, sobbing into his shoulder. "I don't deserve you. Everyone deserves a second chance." Preston held her tight. "We all make mistakes. What matters is what we do after, how we try to make things right. So let's go make things right." They rode into town together that afternoon, and Preston held Penelope's hand the entire way. The marshal was staying at the hotel, and they found him in the small dining room eating a late lunch. He looked up when they approached, his eyes narrowing slightly as he studied Penelope's face. "Marshal, my name is Preston Fletcher. This is my wife, Penelope. I believe you're looking for her." The marshal set down his fork slowly. "Mrs. Fletcher used to be Miss Barrett, I take it?" "Yes, sir." Penelope's voice was steadier than she felt. "I'm the woman you're looking for. I helped my brother steal money from the Continental Bank in St. Louis, and I'm prepared to face the consequences of my actions." "Well." The marshal leaned back in his chair, studying them both. "I'll admit, I didn't expect you to just walk up and turn yourself in. Most folks run when they see me coming." "I'm done running," Penelope said. "I made a terrible mistake, and I want to make it right if I can." Preston stepped forward. "Marshal, I'd like to speak on my wife's behalf. She's been a law-abiding citizen since she arrived in Montana. She's made a home here, contributed to the community. She was coerced by her brother into helping with the theft, and she didn't keep a penny of the stolen money for herself. I'm willing to work with the bank to arrange restitution." The marshal rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. "The bank wants their money back, that's for certain, and they want someone held accountable. But they were more interested in finding your brother, Mrs. Fletcher. He's the one who actually took the money and disappeared." "I don't know where he is," Penelope said. "He ran the moment he had the cash. I haven't heard from him since." "Figured as much. Men like that usually don't stick around to face the music." The marshal sighed. "Here's my situation. I've got orders to bring you back to St. Louis to stand trial. But I'm also a practical man. You turning yourself in, showing remorse, offering to make restitution, that all counts for something. Tell you what, I'm going to send a telegram to the judge handling the case. We'll see what he says about the possibility of handling this without you having to go back to Missouri." "Thank you, Marshal," Preston said. "We appreciate your fairness." They spent the next 3 days in an agony of waiting while the marshal exchanged telegrams with St. Louis. Penelope couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, kept imagining herself in a jail cell far from Preston and the life they had started to build together. Preston stayed by her side as much as he could, holding her when she cried, reassuring her that everything would work out. On the morning of the 4th day, the marshal sent word for them to meet him at the hotel. Penelope's legs felt like water as they climbed the steps to his room. This was it, she thought. This was where she would learn her fate. The marshal looked tired but not unkind as he gestured for them to sit down. "I heard back from Judge Morrison. He's willing to offer you a deal, Mrs. Fletcher. If you agree to make full restitution to the bank, you can stay here in Montana. You'll be on probation for 5 years, meaning any further criminal activity will result in immediate arrest and prosecution. But you won't have to go to prison as long as you keep your nose clean and make good on the debt. Penelope felt like she might collapse with relief. I agree. Absolutely, I agree to those terms. There's more. The marshal pulled out a document. The payments have to be made on a regular schedule. The judge wants proof every 6 months that you're making progress on paying back what was stolen. And he wants a report from the local law confirming you're staying out of trouble. We can do that, Preston said firmly. Whatever it takes. The marshal had them sign the agreement, and then he shook Preston's hand. You're a good man standing by your wife like this. Not everyone would. She made a mistake, Preston said simply. We all deserve a second chance. Walking out of the hotel into the bright December sunshine, Penelope felt like she had been given a gift beyond measure. She wasn't going to prison. She could stay with Preston, could keep building the life they had started. It would take years to pay back what she owed, and the debt would hang over them like a shadow, but they would face it together. Thank you, she said to Preston as they climbed into the wagon. For believing in me, for standing by me, for giving me the second chance I didn't deserve. You did deserve it. He leaned over and kissed her softly. And I'll keep giving you chances for the rest of our lives. That's what love is, Penelope. It's choosing each other, over and over, no matter what comes. The winter months passed slowly, marked by the gradual process of figuring out how to repay such a large debt. Preston sat down with his books and calculated what they could afford to send to the bank each month without bankrupting the ranch. It meant tightening their belts, going without luxuries, and working harder than ever to make the ranch profitable. But they faced it together, and somehow that made the burden lighter. Penelope threw herself into contributing whatever she could. She took in mending from other ranch families, charging a small fee for her skilled needlework. She sold butter and eggs in town. She helped Preston with the ranch accounts, her experience as a bank clerk making her quick with numbers. Every penny they could spare went toward the debt. The other ranchers and townspeople gradually learned the story, news traveling fast in a small community like Bannack. Some were judgmental, whispering about the criminal in their midst, but others were surprisingly supportive. Mrs. Chen made a point of sending business Penelope's way, recommending her mending services to anyone who would listen. Cookie told everyone at the saloon that Mrs. Fletcher was good people who had made one mistake and was working hard to fix it. This is the frontier, he said to anyone who would listen. Half the folks out here are running from something or trying to start over. At least she's got the guts to face up to what she did. Preston's reputation in the community helped as well. He was known as an honest, hard-working man who treated people fairly. If he believed his wife deserved a second chance, many folks were willing to give her the benefit of the doubt. As winter melted into spring, Penelope found herself settling into a new kind of peace. She had been terrified that the truth coming out would destroy everything, but instead, it had set her free in a way she hadn't expected. She no longer had to live in fear of being discovered, no longer had to carefully monitor everything she said to avoid revealing too much about her past. Preston knew the worst thing about her and loved her anyway. That knowledge was more precious than gold. One warm April evening, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of rose and gold, Penelope realized she had something important to tell Preston. "I'm pregnant," she said quietly. Preston's head whipped around to look at her. "You're sure?" "As sure as I can be. I haven't had my monthly courses in almost 3 months, and I've been sick every morning." She bit her lip nervously. "I know the timing isn't ideal with the debt we're trying to repay." Preston pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "The timing is perfect." "This is our future, Penelope. A baby is a blessing, not a burden. We'll have even less money to send to the bank. We'll figure it out, we always do." He pulled back to look at her face, his eyes shining with happiness. "I'm going to be a father. We're going to have a baby." The joy in his voice made her smile despite her worries. "We're going to have a baby," she repeated, and felt the truth of it settle into her bones. This child would be born into a family that had fought for its survival, that had chosen love and forgiveness over judgment and condemnation. This child would know parents who weren't perfect, but who tried every day to do better. The pregnancy progressed through the warm summer months. Penelope's body changed, swelling with new life, and Preston treated her like she was made of spun glass. He wouldn't let her lift anything heavy, insisted she rest in the afternoons, and constantly worried that she was working too hard. "I'm pregnant, not dying," she told him with exasperation after he tried to carry her up the porch steps. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time." "Not my wife having my baby," he countered. "That's a first, and I'm going to make sure both of you come through it safely." His protectiveness was endearing even when it was annoying. She loved seeing this side of him, the fierce devotion he showed to her and their unborn child. It made her more certain than ever that she had made the right choice in marrying him, even if the path to this happiness had been paved with mistakes and lies. In late September, exactly a year after she had first arrived in Bannack, Penelope went into labor. The pains started in the early morning hours, waking her from sleep with their intensity. Preston immediately sent Jake racing into town to fetch the midwife while he stayed by Penelope's side, holding her hand and looking terrified. "I don't know what to do," he admitted as another contraction made her cry out. "Tell me how to help you." "Just stay with me," she gasped. "Don't leave me alone." "Never," he promised. "I'm right here and I'm not going anywhere." The midwife arrived within the hour, a capable woman named Martha who had delivered half the babies in the county. She shooed Preston out of the room over his protests, then examined Penelope with brisk efficiency. "First baby?" Martha asked. "Yes." "Well, it's going to be a while yet." "These things take time. Try to relax between the pains and save your strength for when you really need to push." The labor lasted through the morning and into the afternoon, waves of pain that seemed to go on forever. Preston paced outside the bedroom door, refusing to leave even when Cookie tried to get him to eat something. Through the door, he could hear Penelope's cries and Martha's calm instructions, and every sound made him feel helpless. Finally, as the sun was beginning to sink toward the western mountains, a new sound filled the house. The thin, wavering cry of a newborn baby. Preston burst through the door without waiting for permission, his eyes searching for Penelope. She was propped up in bed, exhausted and pale but smiling, holding a small bundle wrapped in clean cloth. "It's a boy," she said, her voice hoarse from screaming. "We have a son." Preston approached the bed slowly, almost reverently. When he looked down at the tiny red face of his son, something in his chest cracked wide open. This was his child, his family. This was everything he had ever wanted without knowing to want it. "He's perfect," Preston whispered. "What should we name him?" Penelope asked, stroking the baby's soft cheek with one finger. They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy but had never settled on a final choice. Now, looking at this new little person who would carry his legacy forward, Preston knew what felt right. "James," he said. "After my father." "James Fletcher." "James," Penelope repeated, testing the name. "I like that. Hello, little James. Welcome to the world." The baby's arrival changed everything and nothing all at once. The ranch work still had to be done. The debt still had to be paid. But now there was new joy woven through the daily struggles. Preston would come in from working the cattle and make a beeline for wherever Penelope was with the baby, eager to hold his son. He would sit for hours with James cradled against his chest, talking to the infant about the ranch, about the cattle, about all the things they would do together as James grew. Penelope watched her husband with their son and felt her heart swell with love. This was the man who had given her a second chance, who had stood by her when her past caught up with her, who had chosen to build a life with her despite all the reasons he could have walked away. She would spend the rest of her days making sure he never regretted that choice. The years began to pass, marked by the steady rhythm of ranch life and the milestones of James growing up. He took his first steps in the ranch house kitchen, lurching from the table to his father's waiting arms. He spoke his first word, which was "da," much to Preston's delight. He learned to ride before he turned 3, sitting in front of his father on Preston's steady gelding. The debt to the bank slowly shrank as they made their regular payments. It was painfully slow progress, but it was progress nonetheless. Every 6 months, they received a letter from Judge Morrison's office acknowledging their payment and confirming that Penelope was adhering to the terms of her probation. Each letter felt like a small victory. When James was 2 years old, Penelope discovered she was pregnant again. This time the news was received with pure joy, unmarred by the worries that had plagued her first pregnancy. They had proven they could handle whatever came their way. Another child would stretch their resources even thinner, but it would also bring more love into their home. Their second son, who they named Thomas, was born on a snowy January morning in 1879. He was bigger than James had been, with a lusty cry that announced his arrival to the whole ranch. James, now a busy toddler, was fascinated by his new brother and wanted to help with everything, much to Penelope's exhaustion and amusement. "Gentle," she reminded him constantly as James tried to pat the baby with enthusiastic but clumsy hands. "Baby Thomas is very small and delicate." Preston juggled ranch work with helping care for 2 young children, and somehow they all survived the chaos of those early years. The house was noisy and messy in ways it had never been before, filled with the sounds of children playing and crying and laughing. It was exhausting and beautiful all at once. In the summer of 1880, 5 years after Penelope had first arrived in Bannack, they made the final payment on her debt to the Continental Bank. Preston rode into town to send the bank draft, and when he returned home, he was carrying champagne that must have cost a small fortune. "We did it," he said, sweeping Penelope into his arms and spinning her around while the boys shrieked with laughter. "It's over. The debt is paid. You're free." Penelope felt tears streaming down her face. 5 years of scrimping and saving, of working every hour she could, of watching every penny. It had seemed like it would never end, like they would be paying forever, but they had done it. She was free of the debt, free of the probation, free to truly move forward with her life. That night after the boys were asleep, Preston presented her with a small wooden box. Inside was a necklace, a delicate gold chain with a small pendant in the shape of a mountain range. "I had it made for you," he said as he fastened it around her neck, "to commemorate what we've accomplished together. You've worked so hard, Penelope. You've been an amazing wife and mother, and you've faced your past with more courage than most people ever have to show. I'm so proud of you." She turned to face him, the pendant resting cool against her skin. "I couldn't have done any of it without you. You gave me a second chance when no one else would have. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. Everything good in my life came from you taking a chance on a mail-order bride you'd never met." "Best decision I ever made," Preston said, pulling her into his arms. "Marrying you, building this life together, it's been the greatest adventure I could have asked for." They made love that night with a passion and tenderness that spoke of all they had been through together. The struggles and the triumphs, the fear and the faith, the mistakes and the forgiveness. They had built something strong and true out of the most unlikely materials, and it would last them all their days. A month later, a letter arrived from St. Louis. Penelope's hands shook slightly as she opened it, old fears rising up even though she knew she had nothing left to worry about. But the letter wasn't from the bank or from Judge Morrison's office. It was from her brother. Penelope read the words with disbelief and anger rising in equal measure. After 5 years of silence, after leaving her to face the consequences of his actions alone, her brother had the audacity to write asking for money. He was in San Francisco, he said, down on his luck and needing help. He knew she was married to a rancher now, and surely her husband could spare a few $100s to help family. The nerve of him, Preston said when she showed him the letter. After what he put you through, he's asking for more money. He always was good at taking what he wanted and leaving others to clean up the mess. Penelope crumpled the letter in her fist. I'm not going to respond. As far as I'm concerned, I don't have a brother anymore. I support whatever you decide, Preston said. But just so you know, I think that's the right choice. He had his chance to make things right, and he chose to disappear instead. You don't owe him anything. Penelope threw the letter into the stove and watched it burn, feeling a sense of finality as the paper curled and blackened. That chapter of her life was over. She had a family now, a real family built on love and trust and mutual support. She had Preston and James and Thomas. She had friends in town who respected her. She had a home that she had helped build with her own hands and efforts. The years continued to roll by in a cascade of seasons and small moments that added up to a life. James started school in town, riding in with Preston several days a week. Thomas grew into a wild, adventurous child who was constantly getting into mischief on the ranch. Penelope turned 30, then 35, then 40, each year bringing new gray hairs and laugh lines around her eyes. The ranch prospered under Preston's careful management. They were able to increase the herd, buy more land, hire additional help. The years of scraping by to pay off the debt were behind them, and they finally had room to breathe financially. They added on to the house, building a proper dining room and another bedroom. They bought new furniture and real curtains for the windows. When James turned 16, Preston began teaching him the business side of ranching, showing him the account books and explaining the decisions that went into running a successful operation. James proved to have a good head for numbers and a natural way with the cattle. He reminded Penelope of Preston in the way he approached challenges, thinking through problems carefully before taking action. Thomas, on the other hand, had a wilder spirit. At 14, he was already talking about seeing the world beyond Montana, about traveling to San Francisco or maybe even back east. Preston listened to these dreams with patience, never dismissing them but also not encouraging the boy to leave before he was ready. He'll settle down eventually, Preston told Penelope one night as they lay in bed. Or he won't, and he'll go off and have his adventures. Either way, we raised him to think for himself. I just worry, Penelope admitted. The world can be hard on young men who think they know everything. It can, but we've taught both boys to be honest, to work hard, to treat people fairly. That's the best foundation we can give them. Preston pulled her close. And they've seen us work through hard times together. They know what real partnership looks like. Penelope rested her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him. After all these years, she still felt that flutter in her chest when he touched her, still found new things to love about this man who had given her everything. In the fall of 1890, 15 years after Penelope had first arrived in Bannack as a frightened fugitive, the town threw a harvest celebration. There was music and dancing in the street, tables laden with food that the whole community had contributed. Preston and Penelope attended with their sons, now strapping young men of 16 and 14 who were already taller than their mother. As Penelope watched Preston dance with a laughing neighbor woman while her husband looked on fondly, Mrs. Chen came to stand beside her. "You've built a good life here," the older woman said. "I remember when you first came to my store so nervous you could barely speak. Look at you now. Respected member of the community, mother to 2 fine boys, wife to one of the best men in the territory." "I almost threw it all away before it even started," Penelope said quietly. "If you had told that marshal who I was when he came looking for me, my whole life would have been different." Mrs. Chen smiled slightly. "I didn't know who you were for certain, only that you looked scared. And I figured a woman running from something probably had good reason. We've all got secrets, Mrs. Fletcher. Some of us are just better at hiding them than others." "Thank you," Penelope said, meaning it with her whole heart, "for giving me the benefit of the doubt. Thank your husband, Mrs. Chen replied. "He's the one who stood by you when the truth came out. Not every man would have done that." Preston finished his dance and made his way back to Penelope, his face flushed and happy. He held out his hand. "Dance with me." She let him lead her into the circle of dancers, their bodies moving together with the ease of long practice. All around them, their neighbors and friends laughed and celebrated the harvest. James was talking with the blacksmith's pretty daughter, his ears red with embarrassment. Thomas was challenging other boys to see who could eat the most pie. "Happy?" Preston asked, echoing the question he had asked her so many years ago in their bed. "Deliriously," Penelope answered. "I never imagined I could be this happy, Preston. After everything I did, everything that happened, I didn't think I deserved this kind of life." "Everyone deserves a second chance," Preston said, repeating the words that had become something of a motto for them. "And you took that chance and made something beautiful out of it. I'm proud of you, Penelope. I'm proud of us and what we've built together." The music swirled around them, and Penelope let herself be held by this man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved. He had given her a home when she was homeless, a family when she was alone, love when she felt unlovable. He had seen her at her worst and had chosen to believe in her capacity for goodness. As the stars came out overhead, and the celebration continued late into the night, Penelope Fletcher looked around at her life and felt nothing but gratitude. The girl who had helped her brother commit a crime out of desperation, and fear was gone, transformed by love and hard work and forgiveness into a woman who could hold her head high. The years had not been easy, but they had been worth every struggle. James eventually married the blacksmith's daughter, a sweet girl named Anna who fit into the family perfectly. They built a small house on Fletcher land and began raising cattle of their own with Preston's guidance. Thomas did eventually leave to seek his fortune, spending 3 years traveling before returning home with stories of San Francisco and Seattle and all the wonders he had seen. He came back more settled, ready to take his place on the ranch and help run the operation that would one day be his and his brother's. Penelope and Preston grew old together on the ranch they had built with sweat and determination. Their hair turned gray, their hands grew gnarled with arthritis, but their love never diminished. They had weathered storms that would have torn apart a weaker marriage, and they had come through stronger for it. On warm evenings they would sit together on the porch, watching the sun set behind the mountains just as they had done for decades. Sometimes they talked, sharing memories and dreams. Sometimes they simply sat in comfortable silence, their hands intertwined, content to be in each other's presence. Grandchildren came along, filling the ranch house with noise and laughter once again. Penelope taught her granddaughters to sew and cook, passing along the skills she had learned through necessity. Preston taught his grandsons to ride and rope, to understand cattle and land. They were building a legacy that would outlast them, a family rooted in this Montana soil. When Penelope was 65 years old, she received word that her brother had died in San Francisco. The notification came from a lawyer handling his meager estate. There was no money, no property, just debts and a few personal effects. The lawyer wanted to know if she would cover the cost of burial. Penelope thought about the boy her brother had been before gambling had gotten its hooks into him. She remembered him teaching her to fish in the creek behind their childhood home, how he had held her hand at their parents' funeral. That boy deserved a decent burial, even if the man he had become had caused her so much pain. "Send the money," she told Preston. "I need to do this for the brother I used to have, not the one he turned into." Preston arranged the payment without question or judgment. That night, Penelope cried for the family she had lost, for the brother who had chosen his addictions over his sister's safety. But she cried in the arms of the man who had become her real family, and when the tears were done, she felt at peace. She had mourned, she had forgiven, and now she could truly let go. The years continued their inexorable march. Preston's 68th birthday came and went, and though he was still active on the ranch, he began to slow down. His joints ached in the morning, and long days in the saddle left him exhausted. James took over more of the daily operations, making decisions about the herd and the land with his father's blessing. Penelope watched her husband grow older and felt time pressing against her awareness. They had been given so many years together, more than she had dared hope for that September day when she had arrived in Bannack as a terrified fugitive. Every day with him felt like a gift. On their 35th wedding anniversary, Preston surprised her with a trip to Virginia City, the nearest big town. They stayed in a hotel with actual running water and electricity, luxuries that still felt magical to Penelope. Preston took her to a photographer's studio and had their picture taken, something they had never done before. In the photograph, they sit side by side, Preston in his best suit and Penelope in a dress of deep purple velvet. Their faces show the lines and wrinkles of age, but their eyes are bright with love. Preston's hand rests on Penelope's shoulder, and she has her hand over his. The image captured a moment in time, preserving their love for generations yet to come. "I want the grandchildren to remember us like this," Preston explained. "Together and happy. I want them to know what real love looks like." Penelope held the photograph carefully, treasuring it as much as any expensive gift. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything. For your faith in me, for your love, for this beautiful life we've built." "Thank you," Preston replied, "for taking a chance on a lonely rancher's advertisement, for being brave enough to start over, for being the partner I always needed but never knew how to find." They returned to the ranch renewed, ready to face whatever years remained to them with the same determination that had carried them through every challenge. The cattle still needed tending, the land still needed managing, the grandchildren still needed stories and wisdom. Life on the frontier continued its demanding pace, but now there were quiet moments stolen throughout the day. Preston would find Penelope in the garden and steal a kiss. She would bring him coffee while he worked in his office and sit beside him while he did the accounts. They had learned, over 35 years of marriage, that time was precious and love was worth celebrating every single day. On a crisp October morning in 1910, Preston Fletcher passed away peacefully in his sleep with Penelope holding his hand. He was 73 years old and had lived a full, rich life. His sons and grandchildren gathered at the ranch to mourn and celebrate the man who had built something lasting out of hard work and integrity. Penelope stood beside his grave on a hillside overlooking the ranch, watching as they lowered his coffin into the ground. The mountains rose in the distance, the same mountains that had witnessed their entire life together. She felt hollowed out, like someone had reached inside and removed something essential. Preston had been her partner for 35 years, her champion, her love. The world felt colder without him in it, but she was not alone. James stood on one side of her, Thomas on the other. Their wives hovered nearby with the grandchildren. The ranch hands who had worked for Preston for decades were there, hats in hands, paying their respects. Mrs. Chen had made the journey from town despite her advanced age. The community Preston had been part of for over 40 years had come to say goodbye. As the minister spoke about Preston's life and character, Penelope thought about the man who had placed an advertisement for a mail order bride all those years ago. He had been looking for companionship, for partnership, for someone to share his life. What he had gotten was a woman with a criminal past, a woman running from the law, a woman who had lied to him from the very first letter, and he had loved her anyway. He had stood by her when her past caught up with her. He had believed in her capacity for redemption when she barely believed in it herself. He had given her not just a second chance, but a whole new life filled with love and purpose. Penelope Fletcher lived another 8 years after Preston's death, remaining on the ranch that they had built together. She watched her grandchildren grow up and start families of their own. She held her first great-grandchild, a little girl with Preston's green eyes, and whispered stories about the grandfather she would never meet. When she finally passed in her sleep at the age of 83, she was buried beside Preston on that hillside overlooking the ranch. The tombstones were simple granite markers, stating names and dates, but the legacy they left was far more than what could be carved in stone. They had built a family rooted in love and forgiveness. They had shown their children and grandchildren what it meant to stand by your commitments, to work through difficulties instead of running from them, to believe in second chances. The ranch they had established still operated under the Fletcher name, passed down through generations who knew the story of how it all began, because in the end, that's what mattered most. Not the mistakes of the past, but the choices made in the present. Not the circumstances that brought two people together, but the love they built once they found each other. Penelope Barrett had arrived in Bannack, Montana, as a fugitive with nothing but lies and desperation. She left this world as Penelope Fletcher, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother, surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived. And it all started because one cowboy believed that everyone deserved a second chance.